Rumors are flying around as far as should the Steelers do? What will the Steelers do this offseason without any quarterback, with the last year of your general manager? There's going to be some interesting propositions as the Steelers have the most salary cap that they've had in a very long time available to them. But one of the questions that we've explored draft picks, we've explored guys that they should keep in free agency. Let's talk about trade options. And Jeremy Fowler of ESPN brought up a really interesting player on the Steelers roster who could be traded and get back great value for the Steelers to build. I want to talk to Wes Euler, our friend from Steeler Nation Radio and Ears and Beers podcast, right here on the show about that possibility, what it might do for the Steelers, if it's a good move, if it's a bad move, and other options that could be available as they reload and try to set themselves up in 2022. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Hit the like button on this YouTube video if you're watching it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily content for free and available. If you want to help out the show further, give us a 5-star review with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts, and you'll get a special shout out at the end of the show. Joining me is our recurring guest, our friend, our buddy, our man right here, Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio. You can also hear him on the Ears and Beers podcast with Adam Crowley. Wes, how you doing, man?
CC, always fantastic when I get to chop it up with you, buddy.
Yeah, it's awesome. Let's talk straight football to start things off now. While there's discrimination lawsuits in other lands, the Steelers are like, we're just going to stay focused on our bubble right over here, where we're just going to just operate in an offseason plan and get some things done. But one thing that I thought was interesting, if you haven't seen this article, go look up on ESPN. Jeremy Fowler is one of the latest articles on the Steelers. But Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, put up a list where he was listing all these different teams with potential trade players who could be traded. And he brought up an interesting name in Chase Claypool being the guy that maybe the Steelers want to trade. And his logic, Wes, seems sound here, because you're going into a new era where after this year, Kevin Colbert's going to be gone. So the new whoever's going to be assuming the role for a general manager, whether it's Brandon Hunt or Omar Khan or someone outside the organization, whoever that is, they're going to want to set a new tone for the organization. And we know that Mike Tomlin has not been happy with Chase Claypool. Is this something that you think makes sense here, Wes?
Yes and no. I would say, just on the surface, yes, because everything that you just alluded to, it really does feel like the Steelers are not completely resetting or anything like that, but that,
right,
one chapter is closed and it's time to start another one. And with that, you always have to consider, who are we taking into the next era? I think that's something you and I have talked about on this podcast before, how, you love what they have in that regard on defense with the veteran Cam Hayward, with TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick into that next era. On offense, there's a lot of question marks in that regard, right? I think we all agree Najee Harris is on that list. I think we all are pretty optimistic about Pat Freiermuth as well, too. But who are you taking with you into the next era? In theory, Chase Claypool, to me, to question if you want him to be a part of that next chapter is a fair question. I just don't know at this point, after the year that he just had, if that trade value is going to be there. And that's the other side of that equation for me. After his rookie year, Chase Claypool's value was through the roof. Yeah. He, took a step back, sophomore slump, whatever you want to say, in year number 2. And being a second-round pick as well, it's not like he was a 4th or a 5th or an Antonio Brown 6th rounder that you could flip for a 2nd or 3rd and say, all right, that's good business. If you're not getting a top 50 pick for Chase Claypool, that's not good business, because you just spent a top 50 pick on him 2 years ago. So that one's intriguing to me. I definitely think it's fair to say he's on the trade block. I definitely think it's fair to question, again, if he's one of those guys that you want for the long haul in the next era, the next chapter of Steelers football. I just don't know if the value is going to be there to go out and move him.
That's where I'm wondering as well here, because another aspect of this is if you're the Steelers and next year, if you know you're not going to go get a superstar quarterback and you're going to be based in the run game and the defense, maybe having a receiver of his talent isn't what you need the most, and maybe you can use that value to help get one of the pieces that you do need to be that team next year. But also, you do want to have talent at that position. And to your point, not only is he a second-round pick, but he's extremely cheap. You'll only save about $600,000 against the salary cap for letting him go. You're not. I mean, he only costs 1.8 total in your salary cap this year. Those are the guys that you should be happy to keep, unless someone gives you a ridiculous, like if someone comes to you and hands you a first-round pick, you're going to be like Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained. It's like, well, you have me intrigued. You have me interested. He's like, your ridiculous offer of a first-round draft pick for Chase Claypool. That's where I would be. Is like, if you came to me with something stupid, okay, fine, go ahead, we'll take that. But teams aren't going to do that. Teams are going to be looking at this rationally, and they're going to say, you know, we saw the time when he pointed after the first down, and then everyone was talking about, we heard about how he was talking about, hey, let's listen to music at practice, and how Mike Tomlin wasn't happy about that. So those type of things, even if Chase Claypool had a really good year, I think that would kind of tank his value a little bit. But I do get where Jeremy Fowler is going with this, in that the Steelers are trying to become something. They do have a running back. They do have a tight end. They do have a number one receiver in Diontae Johnson, who I think he has to do more to actually be a super duper number one, but he's on his way there.
Agreed.
Chase Claypool has potential, but this third year is going to be a big year, and this will be an interesting year for it to gamble on that value and how it might increase this year. You know what?
That's a really good way to put it. I think the potential gamble of sticking with Chase Claypool and seeing how that can play out next year, and then in his, the fourth and final year of his rookie deal, versus what you would get back for him in a trade, it feels like the smarter risk, or the smarter gamble, or where you want to push your chips to would be the side of, he cost us nothing. We did just spend recent, high draft capital on him. Let's let this play out. I think that's a very good way. You're going to gamble one way or the other, right? That feels more low risk and still with a potential of a higher reward, because if you're swapping Chase Claypool, let's say it's not a draft pick, right? Let's say they just trade him for somebody else straight up. It's probably going to be somebody else who's in a similar situation as Chase, right? Who's, maybe on thin ice with the team a little bit, who's maybe underperformed last year a little bit. You're taking a risk there. You're taking a gamble there as well, too. You do have that rookie season where Chase was very productive, and they used him in a lot of different ways. I think it's the smarter bet. And again, unless someone Django unchains you and makes you an offer you can't refuse. Or wait, was that The Godfather? I don't know. We're all over the place.
We're doing all our movies. Yeah.
I think the smart thing to do is just stick with Chase, see what you got, because as you mentioned, it costs you next to nothing on the cap. And we all know that there certainly is. Even the Steeler fans out there that have soured the most on Chase Claypool, I think you can still agree there is upside. There is potential there. I'd rather let that play out, the devil as opposed to taking a risk with an unknown or somebody else.
No, I'm right with you there. You know what he brings to the table. I also think it's important to note that this bad year came on the worst year of Ben Roethlisberger's career. When Chase Claypool was a serious threat last year was when Ben was performing at a high clip in 2020, when he was doing that, and we were all looking around like, is Ben back? Like, is this a thing? And then we saw him fold in the late part of the season. That's kind of what he became in 2021 as well. But maybe having Chase Claypool as an asset more to you than he is a liability, because he brings the ideas like, listen, when you get the ball in his hands and he has space, if you haven't thrown it high enough for him to jump and fall down, if he's catching it on the run, he's dangerous because he's big, he's fast.
Absolutely.
Tough
to bring down.
He's tough to bring down, and we've seen when you give him a lane, when he gets into full speed, he's tough to catch up to. So that might be an asset.
Again, if you're a Chase Claypool hater, you graduated from USC, you hate Notre Dame, and you hate Chase Claypool, I think you have to agree there is certainly potential and upside and a pretty high ceiling there.
Absolutely. And again, if you're dealing with a younger quarterback or a veteran quarterback who has less passing skills to get it deep down the field, maybe getting him some of those slants and some of those middle plays where he can use that speed or some of those go patterns, maybe that's what you need, because Ben couldn't hit the go patterns too much this past year. Maybe Chase Claypool's speed puts that back into play. But again, these are all speculations. There's nothing official. There's been no word of the Pittsburgh Steelers getting rid of Chase Claypool, but let's stick with this for a little bit longer. Let's talk about other trade possibilities, who the Steelers might be looking at, or what other teams might be having on the table for the Steelers to take. We'll talk about in the next segment here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk about our sponsors, BetOnline. There might be less football being played, but BetOnline.net has way more stuff to bet on this playoff season. From scores, totals, player performance props to where the next fired head coach is going to land, BetOnline is the #1 spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your #1 online wagering destination. BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and all your favorite games. And BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wesley Euler. Wes, okay, other guys the Steelers could consider, guys that you're looking to trade, because there are, I think this is actually a much smaller list than potential of guys they could trade for, simply because a lot of the guys that they have on their roster right now, you want to stick around to build with and to see where they go. Like, you're not trading Cam Hayward. Nope. You're not trading Stephon Tuitt. Nope. He's either back and healthy or hurt and not, and he's gonna be Correct. Done. You're not trading TJ Watt. You're not.
You're not really.
You're not trading Minkah Fitzpatrick. Maybe Diontae Johnson, if you think you can get great value for him, so someone sees that. But again, I don't think the Steelers would be right to trade away guys who are contributing right now, a team that's young, that needs to keep improving, and you need to hold on to your assets. And in fact, the Steelers should be more buyers right now than anything else because of their salary cap situation and the position that they're
agree
that they're in now. In Jeremy Fowler's article, he didn't just list Chase Claypool for the Steelers. He listed guys across the NFL who could be on the move. Now, I'm going to list some ones that I think are the most interesting and possible.
Okay, hit me with this.
For the Steelers. All right, from your boys, the Eagles. Is Wes grew up in Pittsburgh, but he spent some time in Philly, so he had a little bit of love for the Eagles. The player they list from the Eagles is Gardner Minshew. And he's signed through next year, so he would be a free agent after the 2022 season. He'd probably be super cheap and be another veteran quarterback you can just throw into the mix and just say, hey, have at it and can't.
He's one of those guys, Chris, that is intriguing for the few flashes that we've seen him have in Jacksonville and in Philly, and just because he's such a character and such a goofball, right?
Yeah.
But Gardner Minshew is one of those guys. I will tell you this, since I am kind of, I worked in, for those who are unaware of the reference that Chris just made, I worked in Philadelphia for 3 years for the Eagles flagship station, WIP. I was out there. I was a part of the Super Bowl broadcast when they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. My wife is from Philly, and my entire, in-laws, that side of the family, have been season ticket holders forever, and they love the Eagles. So I do kind of know probably more than the average, Steeler fan about the Eagles, because I worked out there and because my wife and family are all huge fans. They're obsessed with Gardner Minshew in Philadelphia right now. Like, there's a lot of people in Philadelphia that want him to be given a shot to be the Eagles starter with Jalen Hurts this summer.
Wow.
So Minshew's one of those names that if he was a pure free agent and you could get him for $3, $4, $5, $6 million, something in that range, I would absolutely take a flyer on that guy. I just don't know. Like, I think you'd have to give up a 3rd or a 4th round pick at this point to get him from Philly. And I don't know if I'm that intrigued to do that. If it was a 6th round pick, yeah, sure, go for it. Again, if it's a cheap, let's take a flyer on this guy, year or 2 deal in free agency, I would totally be all about that. I do think Gardner Minshew is intriguing. I just don't think Philly's going to be as willing to part with him as everybody else seems to think.
Right, I'm with you there. It's not an easy proposition like some are trying to make it
like,
seem.
You could just call up the Eagles and offer him a 6th round pick and they'll take it. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know about that either.
Because he cost them nothing either. The same conversation we just had with Chase Claypool. They're saying this guy costs us nothing, and we think there might be something there. Why would we get rid of him?
Right. Why would we get rid of him? I think that's a very good question. Now, another guy on the list, different side of the field, and this one I think that there's a little bit more something to. Myles Jack, linebacker for the Jaguars.
I like him.
Now, Myles Jack, I've liked him for a while. I thought that he would be a really good linebacker for the Steelers to take. Back when he entered the league in 2016, I thought he would have been a heck of a partner with Ryan Shazier back then. But Myles Jack is in an interesting position because rumors were floating around all throughout the season that he was going to get traded because the Jaguars were with Urban Meyer's situation, and the Jaguars, they stink, and they're just such a dumpster fire. And if you're whoever, the Jaguars still don't have a head coach; they're still waiting to figure out what the heck's going on there.
Give it to Byron Leftwich.
Oh my gosh, but Byron's still waiting. Is like, hey, what's the deal here? There's that's a crazy situation, but it is. When you're a team looking at that situation, the Jaguars already have like $59 million in cap space. The highest paid player on their team next year would be Myles Jack, and he would cost.
Wow.
He has a $13.1 million cap hit against them. If the Steelers were to acquire him straight up for the money that he's owed, he would probably cost about $8.3 million against the Steelers cap. He would also be. Myles Jack he would be in essence what they traded to get from Joe Schobert. They were hoping Joe Schobert can be that veteran partner who was better suited to play next to Devin Bush. And I think Joe Schobert gave a heck of an effort, but he just wasn't the fit for the Steelers. And you're going to unload his salary cap most likely, going into this season. I just see that making sense. But it makes sense. You might replace that with a better linebacker in Myles Jack. Myles Jack is 26 years old. He'll be 27, for next season. He has 2 more years on his deal. He would cost you about $8.3 million next year, and then 11.5 the year after that. And by then, you could, if he's good, you re-sign him to another deal. And this is another reason I think this really works. This is the kind of he's in the money that's currently on his contract is very similar to how the Steelers have done with free agents when they go sign them, like Steven Nelson. Hey, we're going to give you one little year here, but and if you do really big, do really well, we're going to renegotiate and see what happens here. I think Myles Jack would put you in a situation. He's in the prime of his career. He'd be a veteran presence, and if you look at his production over the past year, when he played, he was able to come in. He made 108 tackles this year.
He's a good player.
He's a very good player. He's 118 tackles the year before. He didn't have any pass breakups this year, according to Pro Football Reference, but he did have 5 the year before. He's able to cover and hit and play. He would be a really good guy to sit next to Devin Bush and maybe help settle him down. That's more of a guy you trade for. But again, what would it take when the Steelers are trying to be rebuilt right now?
And there's a lot that goes into that, right? And the last thing you said there, when you're trying to rebuild right now, I think plays into it. Is it worth, and you and I both agree, we like Myles Jack. In theory, I'd love him to be a Pittsburgh Steeler in 2022. But is Myles Jack getting you over the hump to make the playoffs or to contend for a division title? Probably not. Myles Jack is one of those guys that you add to a defense that's like a piece away. If we were having this conversation this time last year, Myles Jack would have been perfect because we knew the Steelers were going to run it back. We knew the Steelers were pushing those chips to the center of the table and trying to go on a final run in what we all thought was and turned out to be the last year of Ben Roethlisberger.
Mm-hmm.
If you could get Myles Jack, if Jacksonville's looking at it like you just said, we stink, we got to tear this thing down and build it up around Trevor Lawrence, and it's just not worth it for Myles Jack to be our highest paid, biggest salary cap hit when you look at the scope of the things for Jaguars, and you can get him for a relative low cost, a 4th, a 5th, a 6th round pick, then I'd say, heck yeah, why not? Because I think what you mentioned about Devin Bush would be a real thing. There could be some nice potential there to have that mentor-mentee type relationship. But if you really are truly looking at this as a reset year, not that the Steelers are never going to tank. We all know that. But if you're thinking, hey, we're going to go 7-10 this year, right? Give or take a game one way or the other. We're going to go 7-10 this year. We're going to reset a little bit. We're going to pick in the top 15 and have a chance to go get our next quarterback. I just don't know if now is the time to give up the capital that it might take to go get a Myles Jack. Again, really like the player. He would fit well. I just don't know if it's the time or the scenario or the situation for the Steelers to do something like that. Again, if he's on the cheap, if he's a 3rd-day draft pick, yeah, sure, maybe go for it. Anything other than that, though, I think you might just be, slapping duct tape over some cracks in the foundation.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, you're trying to fix the foundation. This is the time. This is the time. You know, you're not out here saying, hey, like we have these talents over here that make us a Super Bowl contender. Let's worry about these other problems, sweep that under the rug, and we'll deal with that after.
It's just not the case.
That's not the case right now.
No.
They're trying to build the foundation so that they can be at a stronger position in 1 or 2 years, or whenever they get their franchise quarterback.
And then exactly, and you build the foundation, and then when you think you're ready, you go get your guy, and you have the capital to do so.
Yeah, exactly. You put yourself in a good spot. Now, other names maybe less realistic as far as their availability that Jeremy Fowler listed. Xavier Howard. I mean, we've been hearing it for years. He just signed an extension with Miami. I get that there's turmoil in Miami, and maybe he wants to get away from that, but
not going to be cheap.
Yeah, one, he's not going to be cheap. Two, he's not cheap as with his contract.
Right, that's the double whammy. It would take a nice draft pick or something to get him, and he's got a nice contract as well too.
But other guys that would be interesting. If you want to address the offensive line, Jeremy listed Mekhi Becton for the Jets. I love Mekhi Becton as a player, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Like, I see no scenario where the Jets would give him up right now.
Right.
And listen, Jeremy's very tapped in. You and I know Jeremy. He used to cover the Steelers, and now he's big time ESPN. Like, he's very tapped in. So I don't think he's pulling this out of left field or anything, or just putting Becton's name on there to get people talking and to draw clicks. But I don't see how the Jets would even remotely consider parting with that guy. He was very good in the first couple games of the season. Then he got hurt. He was very good in the last couple games of the season. This was just his second year in the league. He's like 23 years old. And he is, I think you could argue, Tristan Wirfs is at the top of the list. But then after that, you could start to argue Mekhi Becton is number 2 in terms of the best young tackles in the entire NFL. Yeah. Zach Wilson, it's funny. I was just having this conversation with one of my buddies before I hopped on here. Zach Wilson looked pretty good in the Jets' last 2 games of the season. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that's because Mekhi Becton was back and protecting his blind side and actually giving Zach Wilson some time to sit back there and try and make some throws. I'm not saying Zach Wilson is, going to end up being a franchise quarterback or anything like that, but there was a clear difference between his performance when Becton was on the field and when Becton was off the field. He's, in my mind, one of the few things that Jets team has going for him. It's like Mekhi Becton and Quinnen Williams. That's about what they got to hang their hat on right now. If I were the Steelers, I would give up stuff for Mekhi Becton for sure. He's in his early 20s. I'd give up Chase Claypool in a second-round pick. Hell, honestly, I might even give up that 20th overall first-round pick for Mekhi Becton. That's how good, that's how young he is. That one's surprising to me. I think it would take a lot to get him if that really is something the Jets are considering.
Certainly, there's a lot of questions as far as players who are out there and who could be available. Mekhi Becton would be a major get, but just again, on the unrealistic side, I could see Myles Jack because there's been rumors about him being moved, and he's a big money guy on a franchise. That's just
what Jacksonville does,
and that's also what Jacksonville does. Heck, Schobert's who they got him from. So the Jaguars are who the Steelers got Schobert from. So all things being considered, that's going to be. That's out. But maybe looking at Myles Jack, maybe looking at other guys. But ultimately, I think the Steelers are just saying, hey, who are the guys that we can bring in right now who can be contributors, and we can continue to build the defense in the way that we want to believe in, and invest in the guys that we want to invest in. So big questions there as far as how they will continue to do that. But we got to take a quick break. When we come back, Tom Brady's official retirement is now official, and that's a done deal. So now it does mean.
Are you sure? Are we sure?
Are we sure? Yeah, he might come out and change it again tomorrow. But now it does mean that both him and Ben Roethlisberger's first year of eligibility for Canton, Ohio, to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame are on the same year. So we're going to talk about that, the legacy of that, what craziness might go down in Canton when Steelers fans might have to stand there for Tom Brady. We'll talk about that in our next segment here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, let's talk about our great sponsor, Built Bar. With the new year, that means New Year's resolutions. And if yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plans. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolutions because they taste so good that you'll want to eat them, unlike the protein bars that can be chalky or waxy or just taste downright nasty. If you want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring sometimes. By the middle of your third week, you're sitting with, man, what's the use? This isn't worth it. Where's the chocolate? Well, Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and in doing so, only have 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, only 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to the average candy bar, which packs around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Here's an idea for the new year. If you got all those secret stashes where you keep your snacks, throw those snacks away, because all that's going to do is make you cheat on your plan. Replace them with Built Bars. You know, I have so many different flavors to choose from, whether it's cherry barcia, mint chocolate brownie, coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, salted caramel. There's all sorts of flavors available. If you go to built.com right now to get your favorite Built Bar flavor, and you can get a bonus on that by getting 15% off by using the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15, when you visit built.com to buy your next order of Built Bars. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Wesley Euler. Let's talk a little bit about Tom Brady's retirement. Now, I'm not here to wax poetically about Tom Brady. This is a Steelers podcast.
I was going to say, you might get canceled. You might get canceled around these parts.
I don't really care as much about him. It's like, okay, great, have a good door. I don't let the door hit you anyway out, Tommy. But at the same time, there is relevance to this, because now Ben Roethlisberger, who retired this year, is going to be eligible at the same time to go to the Pro Football Hall of Fame the same year as Tom Brady. Now, I don't think that that's going to impede Ben Roethlisberger. I do think he's going to be a first ballot guy, Wes, though there are some people out there that still hold grudges against him and might preclude him from being part of that class. However, I do think that the bigger question is, how does this presentation go in Canton? Because we all know, Canton being so close by in the state of Ohio, Steelers fans, when they get a guy they love, they show it. When Jerome Bettis' induction happened, they took over Canton. When Troy Polamalu, they took over Canton. Now, you saw the craziness that was Heinz Field for Ben's last game. Can you imagine what a Canton, Ohio would look like for Ben Roethlisberger? That, to me, the idea that Steelers fans could overpopulate that area, take up most of the seats for the presentation. If they presented both of those guys on the same night and you have the same crowd, two things that can happen there, Wes. One thing is that Steelers fans, because Tom Brady will be last. He'll be the grand finale. They'll
I thought one thing was war.
Yeah, war. Okay, 3 things. War, absolute war. But see, I don't think that there's going to be enough Patriot fans to have the war, because you're going to have all the Steelers fans that are right there. And maybe there will be enough Patriots fans. But I look at this and say, what's going to happen if Steelers fans, boo Tom Brady when he comes out, because they're gonna be like, we don't like him. Steelers fans, and for all the talk that everyone is about Tom Brady's greatness and Tom Brady's this, Tom Brady's that, he's a cheater several times over, and Steelers fans are one of the ones like, hey, we were like the main one that they did Spygate for, according to ESPN's investigation that they've proved for years now. And that doesn't even involve Deflategate. Steelers fans doing that, or if Steelers fans just straight up leave, like I could see Steelers fans being that petty because it's Tom Brady.
Like the student section that turns their back when the other team gets announced.
Exactly. Just like, no, we're not going to do it. And see, but see, that's cute. That's like, all right, that you're in our home arena. But this would be the final moment of Tom Brady's NFL-ness, where he's getting enshrined. Everyone's called him the GOAT. Right. You're right. But it's like he's the GOAT and all that. And could it be marred by Steelers fans? I feel like the NFL would do everything they could to make sure that wouldn't happen.
Oh, no, absolutely. That's a great point by you, because we know. Listen, Tom Brady, right? Last year he was shown on the Jumbotron, wasn't it? Or Peyton Manning gave him props during his speech, and all the Steelers fans that were there for Troy Polamalu went nuts. And that was just Tom Brady getting recognized on behalf of Peyton Manning. Imagine what it's going to be when it's Tom Brady standing at the podium for 15, 20 minutes giving his speech. There could be some vitriol there. Absolutely. Part of me also thinks, too, that while Steelers fans do not like Tom Brady, while we have no love for those guys, Steelers fans are also very educated football fans. Like, I'm not saying Steeler Nation is going to clap for the guy or anything like that, but maybe they would respect the moment a little bit as well,
Very
too,
possible.
because we could certainly argue that everybody else there could do the same thing with Ben Roethlisberger for some of the things that have gone on with him throughout his career. All this to be said, though, Chris, it's a lot of question marks. And the NFL doesn't like question marks. It's going to be a massive class because you're going to have those two. Good chance you could have Gronk if he retires as well. Good chance you could have Adrian Peterson if he retires as well. I mean, that's a monster class.
That's a loaded class.
That's a monster class. I was looking into this. I do think Larry Fitzgerald, if he does officially retire, would be eligible the year before.
Oh my gosh. I was saying this right because his last year of playing.
Because it goes from your last year of playing, not when you officially retire. So Fitz, but I mean, could you imagine if Fitz was in that conversation as well too?
I couldn't. I legit couldn't.
Maybe they do one of these things and it worked. You know, they had to do it last year because the 2020 ceremony was canceled because of the pandemic, where they had the 2 nights. Was it 2 nights or was it 2 weekends?
I think it was 2 weekends.
I think you're right. Maybe they looked at that and they say it's more revenue, it's more business for the local area, more hotel rooms, more this. If we can, wouldn't that be the most NFL thing ever? If we can stretch Hall of Fame weekend into 2 weeks and capitalize on it more and get more butts in the seats and make more money and more revenue, let's do it. Maybe they saw what happened last year and the success that they had there, and they look at the potential of all kinds of Steelers fans, all kinds of Tom Brady fans. Because listen, Chris, we all know Patriots fans can't hold a candle to Steelers fans. Okay, they just can't. And while the Steelers are CEO, president, vice president, director of everything in Pittsburgh, mayor, governor, the Steelers are everything in Pittsburgh. The Patriots aren't that in Boston. It's like the Red Sox 1, it's the Celtics 2. I will say, though, you got to think, they haven't been spoiled like we've been spoiled. I mean, every decade, over a decade, there's been a handful of Steelers players ever since the 80s.
This is true.
When those 70s guys came up, we've been fortunate that every few years as Steeler Nation, we get somebody into the Hall of Fame and we go to Canton and we take it over. Patriots haven't had that. And so there's probably a lot of Patriots fans
who want to make this the moment.
And again, listen, I know nobody travels like Steeler Nation. Like, I'm not saying, but I would not underestimate how many Patriots fans will be there as well, too, because they haven't had this. They haven't had Mean Joe Green go in. They haven't had Lambert go in. They haven't had Bradshaw. They haven't had Bettis. They haven't had Polamalu. They haven't had anything close to that type of legacy that the Steelers have had. Bill Cowher going in. Mm-hmm. I think that it'll be a real moment for dads and sons, to the Patriots fans that have never been to Canton, to go for this in 5 years. I think the NFL looks at it all and they say, money, 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 money. Yeah. And they make either 2 nights or 2 weekends out of it. I think that will be the solution.
We all know the NFL is all about stretching the money out, making it work for them even more. It would just make sense that they would do multiple nights and multiple weekends.
It would, because you can do it. You're the NFL, it's the Steelers, it's the Patriots, it's Brady, it's Roethlisberger. You could easily do it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a that would be the route to go. But the idea of both of them sharing a stage would be a wild scene to think about in the near future. But all things considered, I don't think that's something that's way down the line. I also think it could be very interesting to see the Steelers' success over the next 5 years, or lack of success. How will that change the conversation? Will Steelers fans get another quarterback by then who they're really excited about? Will the Patriots, be able to remain a playoff team? Will the Steelers be able to remain a playoff team? If those teams head in different directions, maybe there's some feelings that get a little bit soured, or not soured, but just kind of like lessened in their impact. I think there's some possibility for that, and why this may be a bunch of hubbub about nothing. But I do think that's going to be a very interesting thing. I joked on Twitter the other day or last week when the story first came out that Tom Brady was going to retire, and I was like, man, he's like, how can I mess with Ben Roethlisberger one more time?
One more time.
Yeah, it just and I said that in jest, but it is funny to think about. It's like, dang, like Ben couldn't even have just his year where it would have been about him and Canton. So really,
you know what though? I bet you there's some people looking at it that say, like, and again, this is a Steelers podcast. We're Steelers fans. We cover the Steelers for a living. But you know that there's a lot of Tom Brady stands out there who are looking at it and saying, well, Ben doesn't deserve. He's Tom Brady. It's the GOAT. Why is Ben going to have to rain on his parade? Who cares about the Steelers and Ben? It's TB12. It's the GOAT. So you know what? The more and more you and I talk this out in real time, Chris, I think
your Boston voice?
The only solution, where's Bill Burr when you need him? The only solution is separate weekends. Separate weekends. Do it. Put Brady and Gronk in on one weekend. Put Ben and Adrian Peterson on the other weekend, and profit.
It makes the most sense to me. That's all we have for you here today on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. If you were listening to us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Odyssey, or if you were watching us on YouTube, if you're doing so, watching us on YouTube, hit the like button on the video. It really helps us out. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily content on the Pittsburgh Steelers. This show is always on Monday through Friday, giving you new Steelers content. Wes, thanks so much for coming in, my friend. Let me know I can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Yes, sir. Into the off-season schedule on SNR. So Arthur Moats and I are now live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon on your iHeart app and website, on the Steelers app and website. You can get the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Steelers Blitz is where you find us. Mr. Chris Carter joins us 12:30 on Mondays, so make sure you're tuning in or catching the podcast for that. And then once again, I do host, speaking of podcasts, I know that this is a podcast audience. For those of you that are WVU fans as well, too, football and basketball, myself and Adam Crowley, we have the Ears and Beers podcast. You can get us on Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. We also just a couple weeks ago started a YouTube channel as well, too. So you can show us some love there as well if you want to check out our beautiful mugs. You can always follow me on Twitter at Wesley Euler, where I post all this sports propaganda that I'm doing every single day.
It's propaganda. Do follow him at Wesley Euler. It's a great follow. He's a great guy.
Hey, thanks,
Wes. Thanks for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You are always a treasure. But that's all we have for you here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You could get this show, like I said, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you want to help the show out further, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts, and you'll get a special shout out at the end of the show. We're back in your ears and on your screens Thursday, giving you another episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast.